Welcome to our study of Matthew. We're in Lesson 6, Chapter 10 of Matthew. Okay, today I am going to read that chapter in full before we begin. Matthew 10, starting in verse 1. Jesus called his disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James son of Zebedee and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles, or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Do not get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts. No bag for the journey, or extra shirt, or sandals, or a staff. For the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person, and stay at their house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. Truly I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time you will be given what to say. For it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you're persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for students to be like their teachers, and servants like their masters. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household? So do not be afraid of them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward. Okay, so let's go on back to the beginning. I want us to just remember the last part of chapter 9 of Matthew. Remember what Jesus told his disciples at the very end? He said, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. So, now in chapter 10, Jesus is preparing his disciples to do just that, to go out into the harvest field. So, Jesus chooses his staff. In verse 1, he called the 12, and he gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. Now remember that the past 2 chapters, last lesson, the theme was authority and faith. So we are continuing on with that theme of authority. But Jesus is now giving authority to his 12 disciples. All right, every leader who embarks on a great mission needs a staff. He chooses a staff. Now, what is, I'm already behind. All right, he gives them authority to drive out evil spirits, heal disease, and sickness. Okay, what is a disciple? He is a learner. He learns the wisdom from his teacher. And with Jesus, there were more than 12 disciples at this time. Jesus chose his 12 from all of the disciples that he had. So he selected 12 to be close to him, to be with him all the time. Now, in Luke 10, Luke talks about the 72 that were sent out. They were sent out 2 by 2. And the 12 were sent out 2 by 2. So, I don't know why I said 2 by 2, but they're sent out in twos. Thinking of Noah. 1 Corinthians 10, Paul infers that there were 500 disciples at that time. So Jesus chooses 12 of them. And then down here in verse 2, he names the 12 apostles. This is where he uses apostles for those particular 12. Now, apostle comes from the Greek word apostello, and it means one sent forth with a commission. And they function with the king's authority. So, the Greeks, they would send out, instead of the king going everywhere to tell people what he wanted them to do, he would send the king's messengers with a proclamation. And these messengers were called apostello because they were given the authority of the king. Now, they weren't the king, but they carried his authority. So, who were the disciples that Jesus called? First of all, and we read these in verse 2, he actually names them in pairs. So, it is thought that he sent each of these pairs out together. Apostles were Simon, called Peter, Andrew, his brother, Then there was James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Then we have Philip and Bartholomew. Next we have Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus. Next we have Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus. Okay, so why 12? Well, 12 was an important number for the Jews. You know, remember us talking, we've talked before about different numbers and the importance that the Jews put on these numbers. So to a Jew, the number 12 represents totality, wholeness, and completion of God's purpose. So, for instance, there were 12 tribes of Israel. This was very important. It was completeness. And so now there are 12 apostles. In Revelation, you read about the 24 elders. That is a multiple of 12. So these 12 men, these 12 apostles, were to be an integral part of God's plan. And they will be the instruments that God uses to complete God's purpose. Okay, so these are ordinary men, aren't they? They are fishermen. They are tax. There's tax collector. There's I don't know what all, but they're just ordinary men. But they're going to do extraordinary things because they are in the presence of Jesus. They're with Jesus. So even though they're ordinary, they're going to be extraordinary. And it was an extraordinary mix in a way, wasn't it? Because just the fact that there was a tax collector and a zealot in the 12, that's pretty amazing that Jesus would have done that. But evidently they meshed, and Jesus had a purpose for every one of those being one of his apostles. Okay, continuing on to verse 5. Now, he sent them out with some instructions, didn't he? First of all, he told them to not go among the Gentiles or the Samaritans, and he told them to go only to the lost sheep of Israel. Why? Why was that? Well, why just to Israel? Well, the Jews had a special place in history with God, didn't they? Beginning with Abraham. When you go to Genesis 12, verse 2, and Genesis 22, verses 17 and 18, God promises Abraham that he will be the father of many nations. And this inheritance was to be for his children. There were children of the promise that would come through Isaac. And these were the children of Israel. Isaac, then Jacob, and then Judah, and on down. Now, they had been promised this inheritance of God. They were the children of God. So, they needed to have the first opportunity to hear about the kingdom, to hear about this gospel, and to have the first opportunity to accept it, and the first opportunity to reject it. Also, the 12, they were not equipped really to go to the Gentiles. They were Jews. They were young. They didn't really have a lot to do with Gentiles or Samaritans because they were taught that they were supposed to stay away from them. So they weren't really equipped for this yet. They had to start small. There were only 6 pairs of them. So they weren't able to go everywhere. So they had to make a concentrated effort in one area, which would be around Galilee, around those cities and towns, only to the Israelites. And also, what were they to preach? It said they were to proclaim the kingdom of heaven is near. Now, there are two other men that preached the kingdom of heaven is near. Who were they? That's John the Baptist, and Jesus also preached that. Now, he also gives them specific instructions. First, he says to heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, and drive out demons. They were given the power of the king. Do you remember the title of our last lesson, The Power of the King? And we talked about 11 miracles that Jesus performed. And Jesus has now given his apostles, these 12 apostles, the ability to do all those miracles, except for the miracle of the winds and the waves. I don't see that here. But he's given them the power of the king so that this power would back their authority. It would show their authority, prove that they were from the king. They were from Jesus. They were from this man who was doing all of these miracles. So this would show the people of the town who they were and who they were from. Also, he said, freely you have received, freely give. Freely give it. He continues on and says, take no money, no bag, no extra shirts, no sandals, no staff. Why did he do that? Well, for one thing, the Jewish Talmud actually says, no one is to go to the Temple Mount with staff, shoes, girdle of money, or dusty feet. So, that was a thing. And why was that? They were to show their interest in God. The only interest they should have when going to the Temple Mount is to worship God. So, Jesus wants them, whenever they walk into a town, their only interest should be proclaiming the kingdom of heaven is near. They shouldn't have to be worried about this other stuff. All right, back in verse 9, he talks about their belt. Don't take money with you in your belts. So got a picture of a dress, of the way they would dress. And you see this sash here? A lot of times it was shorter. This is just the only good picture I could find. But in at least one of the sashes, sometimes both of them, it would be doubled down there, and they would be able to put their money in there. And it's like a money belt, but it was kept in the ends of these sashes. Now, they would still have this belt, or this girdle, they called it, but they would not carry any money in it for this trip. Also, it said no bag for the journey. So what's the difference in the purse and the bag? And it wasn't like a suitcase. It was, from what I was able to put together in my reading, there were wandering philosophers who would have a bag. And they would maybe stand in the street and philosophize about things. And then it was sort of entertainment. And then they would have their bag that they would open up. And people would give money to him for his philosophy. Well, they're not to carry a bag like that. Then also, of course, they weren't supposed to take in any extra clothes or sandals or a staff. So we don't know how long they were supposed to be on this trip. It just doesn't say. And also, they were to stay with one family as long as they were in the town. And when they went into a home, they were to give a greeting or a blessing. Now, hospitality, it was very important at this time. It's very important in that part of the world now. But it was very common for a teacher to come to town, and or not even a teacher, just a visitor. And if they didn't know anyone, they were to talk to people, who's a good person that I can stay with, because hospitality was such a big deal. So this first thing, stay with one family in each town, this was a matter of courtesy, because Jesus didn't want them to leave the first house because they might get a better offer from another house. They might get another offer from someone else who has a better house, or they just like them better. No, you stay with the first person that you stay with, where you go that first night. That's where you stay. And then when you enter the house, you give this blessing, and then it said, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. So, once they start proclaiming their message, the person in the house that was giving them refuge or hospitality might not like what they had to say. And so they were allowed to let their peace return to them. Okay? There is an obligation here inferred by Jesus on the teacher, on his disciples, and also on the people of the town, right? The teacher or his disciples must not dwell on material things. Their focus was to be on their message that they were giving to the people. But the people of God were always to support a man of God. It was just understood when a rabbi or disciple of a rabbi came to town that they were to take care of these men of God. All right, now continue on to verse 14. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. Now, when a Jew would leave a Gentile city or a Samaritan city, as soon as they got out of that town or city, they would shake the dust off their feet. They would shake that contamination off their feet. And so basically Jesus was telling them, if these, the towns that you go, these Israelite towns that you go to, if they reject your word, if they don't want to have anything to do with it, if they don't accept it, you treat that town or that home like you would a Gentile city or a Samaritan city. All right, then he says, I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. Now we get on to verse 16. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. This is the first warning he's given them. And he's not going to sugarcoat things for them. I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. He indicates in verse 14 that there may be people and towns that don't want to listen to what they have to say, that they run them out of town. So, sheep among wolves. You've got a sheep pen with lots of sheep in it, and a wolf comes along. Shepherd, where is the shepherd? Don't know. But if a wolf can get a sheep, he will. Now, are the sheep going to band together and fight that wolf? No. They don't know how to do that. But the wolf would grab the sheep, and the sheep could not fight. So he's sending them out with no protection, like sheep among wolves. But then he says, therefore, since I'm doing this, and since you're having to do this, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Now, had never thought of a snake being shrewd. But in the sense that he senses danger and he gets away from danger if he possibly can, that's what Jesus is talking about. Now, he's not talking about being a coward. You might think that's what he's talking about, but no, he's not. He's saying, if you're sensing danger, escape from the danger in order to go to the next town and preach about the kingdom to them. Now, he also says, as innocent as doves. All right, so what if you cannot escape from the danger and you do have to go through persecution? Everyone who knows you and who has seen you in that town, they will know that you're innocent. You are innocent, so be innocent as doves. Then in verse 17, he continues this thing. He says, so be on your guard. Be on your guard. Now from here on out, if you're following the questions, question number 6 is Jesus still speaking of this trip, or is he referring to future events? Well, we have to keep in mind that Matthew does not write chronologically. He writes systematically. Remember us talking about that? Well, and in fact, we talked about the 5 blocks of teaching that Jesus did. The first block was the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 through 7. The second block is Matthew 10. That's the block we're in right now. He's teaching his disciples. So, Matthew is probably taking teaching that they heard from Jesus throughout the 3 years that they were with him, and he has put them in this teaching block in his gospel. So it's very possible that he did not bring this up when he sent them out for the first time, but as they get closer and closer toward his crucifixion, he's going to be telling them, if you'll recall, he'll be telling them, I'm not going to always be here. And then he flat out tells them, I'm going to be crucified, and or they're going to kill me, and you'll be left alone. So he has to get them ready. So some of this teaching is probably taught to them a little bit later. But Matthew, who writes systematically, is putting it all in this chapter. Okay, so let's go on to 17. He talks about being handed over to the local councils and being flogged in the synagogues. Now, this is talking about Jews being in front of the Jewish councils, like the Sanhedrin. And this happened, didn't it? Do you remember in Acts, Peter and John were before the council, they were arrested, and they were flogged because of Jesus. So this did happen, and he warned them that this would happen. In verse 18, he said, on my account you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. So this is actually talking about Gentiles, and we know that Paul was in front of kings and governors. So this is probably talking about that time way in the future. But Jews and Gentiles, when the disciples, when these apostles are arrested and they are in front of these councils, they are in front of these kings and governors, they are able to spread the gospel, aren't they? To the Sanhedrin and to kings, to governors, to people that are very high up in the government. And they aren't probably the only ones in the room. There are probably a lot of people in the room listening to them and hearing what they have to say. Many of them may have become followers of Jesus. So, who knows? When we are persecuted, or people that you hear about now in other countries are persecuted, they have the opportunity to speak Jesus to people who might not ever hear about him. So, would they accept it? That's the question. But at least they got the opportunity to hear it. Continuing on, verse 19. When they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. Why? At that time you will be given what to say, for it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. The Spirit would be upon them, speaking for them. Then he goes on in verse 21 and talks about brother betraying brother to death, a father his child, children rebelling against their parents and having their parents put to death. What is that all about? Okay, the Jews, from the time they were little, were taught that the present is wholly bad, it's all bad. But there is an age to come that will be wondrous. And in the middle of, between the present and the age to come, there will be what's called the day of the Lord. Now, this day of the Lord, it would be a time of chaos, of destruction, and of judgment. And it would split friends and families. So Jesus here is alluding to the day of the Lord. And these disciples, they had been hearing about this day of the Lord from the time they were little. And Jesus says this. And they realize Jesus is saying, this is the time. This is the day of the Lord. We're in the time of the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord had come. And they realized that they were living in the greatest days of history. There would never be a day, a time that was greater than the time they were living in. And we know that that's true because of everything that happened in Acts when the Holy Spirit descended on them. I'm sure the warnings gave them pause, but they were young men, and they were excited to be a part of something so great, the greatest thing in history. Okay, now Jesus, again, he's not sugarcoating anything. He's letting them know that in verse 22, he's saying, you will be hated because of me. Hated. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Gotta stand firm. Okay, verse 23. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. All right, so this is referring back to being as shrewd as snakes. When you are persecuted, it's going to happen. When you're persecuted in one place, flee to another. Now, if you're doing the questions, number 9 is, can you think of a time when an apostle of Jesus would be persecuted in one place and flee to another? And I gave you Acts 13, Acts 14, and Acts 19 and 20. Those refer to times that the apostle Paul was persecuted in a city and he would flee to another city. Now, I want you to understand something. Being reckless is not courageous. They were going to have to suffer for their faith. But when it was prudent, Jesus wanted them to flee somewhere else and continue the spread of the gospel, of the good news. But then there's this promise. He says, truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. I looked through lots of different commentaries on this. And scholars are very divided about what this means. So I'm not going to assume that I have all the answers to this. I'm just going to tell you that there's a lot of thoughts about it. And if you're interested in that, you can study that on your own. But for me, I look at this as a promise of vindication, that the gospel will continue to be spread throughout the world. It will be an ongoing thing and will not be able to finish before the Son of Man comes. But at the coming of the Son of Man, we will be vindicated. So we need to keep spreading the news about Jesus. Keep telling people about him and about the wonderful thing that he did for us in taking our sins on himself. Verse 24, 24 and 25. The student is not above his teacher. It is enough for students to be like their teachers, servants like their masters. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household? So Jesus was going to have to suffer. He's telling him that. And he's going to be slandered. In fact, they've already heard him being slandered. And he's saying, this is going to happen to you as well. You're going to suffer because of me. You're going to be slandered because of me. And he's saying, well, we've already read how the Pharisees have said that he's working for the prince of demons. And here he alludes to that. So they're going to say that about you too. He's warning them. No sugarcoating from Jesus. Continuing on in verse 26. First of all, question for you. I did not know this. What command in the Bible is repeated most often? That one. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Here, he says it 3 times. First in verse 26, do not be afraid of them. And he is referring to persecutors, people who would persecute them. He's saying nothing that is concealed right now will stay concealed. It will be disclosed. Things that are hidden now will be made known. Truth will triumph in the end. And truth will be obvious. So listen to what I tell you. Listen, Jesus is saying, listen to me. Listen to what I tell you. And then proclaim it loudly. the prophets, the old prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Hosea, there are just so many prophets of God that were in their in the Torah that they read about, and they were all persecuted. They would tell the people what God had told them, but the people would ridicule them. They didn't want to listen. This is the children of Israel. They didn't want to hear from those prophets. They would persecute those prophets. They killed many of those prophets. So Jesus is also telling them it's the way it's always been with the children of Israel. God tells the prophets what he wants the people to know, and the people don't want to hear it. And there will be many of the Jews that will not want to hear it, but they will persecute you. Okay. And today, a Christian witness needs to think about that. I've got a quote from William Barclay. He's one of the men who wrote one of my commentaries. The Christian witness knows no fear because he knows that the judgments of eternity will correct the judgments of time. You know, time and eternity, two different things. We live with time here. Eternity, there is no time. Is absent. The Christian listens with reverence, and he speaks with courage because he knows that he is in the presence of God. As long as we're in the presence of God, we can speak with courage, even though we know that it's possible we will be persecuted for that. Continuing to verse 28. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Now, the Jews had a fear of the awfulness of the punishment of God. They revered God because of his greatness. And they feared him because this punishment involved the body and the soul. Not just the body and the soul. So he says here, rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Now, it is interesting that he says, don't be afraid, and do be afraid, and don't be afraid. But don't be afraid of those who can kill the body but not the soul. Do be afraid of God. In other words, revere God. Hold him in awe. Revere him. Have holy fear for God because of who he is. God is holy. He is set apart. There is only one God. And we must never, ever forget that. We must always treat him with that reverence. But at the same time, Jesus talks about these sparrows that are sold for a penny. Not one of them falls to the ground without the Father knowing about it. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. But about the sparrows, this word that not one of them will fall to the ground. I've always thought of that a sparrow would fall to the ground dead. And you know, that's not a pretty picture. Or maybe that Jesus knows when even a sparrow dies. But actually, this word fall to the ground, it means to light to light on the ground. Sparrows are little, and when they light on the ground, they hop around. You've seen them. They're very cute, sweet, but they're just hopping around. And God knows when they light on the ground and hop around. So if he cares about those little sparrows, and he knows when every little sparrow lights on the ground, he cares about us so much. He knows how many hairs are on our head. When I brush my hair in the bathroom, he knows how many hairs fell on the floor. I notice a lot of hair, so I have to clean it up. But God knows how many hairs are on my head all the time. And he says, last one in verse 31, he says, don't be afraid, because you are worth more than many sparrows. So I think that is, it's a sweet analogy that Jesus gave. On to verse 32. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. So the church today is built on those who stood with faith, with that immovable faith. When we studied Hebrews, we studied chapter 11, the cloud of witnesses, those who were faithful to the end, who suffered persecution and death for God. So he's talking about not just the disciples here, he's talking about us as well. So how might we disown Christ? We could disown him with our words, couldn't we? When we're with people who are not Christians, speaking about God like the world does, laughing and talking and saying the same things they're saying about God, because we're in their company, or taking the Lord's name in vain, or laughing at things that are hurtful to God. Those are all things we do with our words. We can disown him with our silence. When we have the opportunity to speak up for against evil, to take a stand against evil, or to show whose side we're on, do we disown him sometimes with our silence? And we disown him sometimes with our actions, don't we? Upon our confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, we vowed to be different from the world. Romans 12 verse 2 says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Continuing on in verse 34, he says, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Here he's going back to the day of the Lord, talking about a man against his father. And he quotes Micah 7 verse 6, or really Micah 7 verses 4 to 6. Now, I want to read that to you. Let's see, Micah, it's not very far up here. Micah 7 verses 4b to verse 6. The day God visits you has come, the day your watchmen sound the alarm. Now is the time of your confusion. Do not trust a neighbor. Put no confidence in a friend. Even with the woman who lies in your embrace, guard the words of your lips. For a son dishonors his father. A daughter rises up against her mother. A daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the members of his own household. So if you'll notice, this is what Jesus quotes. Verse 36, a man's enemies will be the members of his own household. So he is boldly saying now that the day of the Lord has come. He is quoting this scripture. Now in verse 34, he says, he did not come to bring peace, but a sword. So he's telling them, prepare for war. Prepare for war. Warfare among families. Not, not what they're used to having as war, the warfare, but warfare among families. Verse 37, he's telling them, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He demands a choice. So he says, you're going to have to make a choice. Verse 38, whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. There is a cost involved. There's a cost involved. And we must expect to pay the cost. Pay the price. Sorry, we expect to pay the price. Verse 39 is a warning. Whoever finds their life will lose it. If you cherish your life more than Jesus, you're going to lose it. But there's also promise of great rewards. Whoever loses their life for my sake, Jesus said, will find it. Because it was an honor to give one's life for the Lord. In verse 40, anyone who welcomes you welcomes me. Anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Now this was a common way of speaking with the Jews. So he's talking about he's telling them, anyone who welcomes you is going to welcome me. To receive a person's messenger was to receive the person himself. So we can't all be prophets. Whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. So we can't all be prophets, can we? But we can give the gift of hospitality and receive the same reward. Whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. Whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. We may not stand out in a crowd as greatly righteous, but who knows who we're going to influence. We can help someone be good, and we will receive the same reward. We may not have the ability to teach, but we can all teach by example, can't we? And we will receive the same reward. I think that's very comforting. Anyone who gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward. I do want to end with another quote from William Barclay. I'll put this up here, but I'm gonna. There's a little more to the quote than just this. This is the last part. The church and Christ will always need their great orators, their great shining examples of sainthood, their great teachers, those whose names are household words. But the church and Christ will always need those in whose homes there's hospitality, on whose hands there is all the service which makes a home, and in whose hearts there is the caring which is Christian love. From William Barclay. All right. I look forward to seeing you next time when we will study lesson 7. I believe we will be in chapters 11 and 12. So that will be later on in January. So I'll see you then. Alrighty, bye-bye.